this Tech Trends report is really about how the human is at the center of technology. Nothing is tech for tech's sake or Gen AI because it's the new emerging tech or the next shiny object. It is how can humans do more, create more, enjoy more through tech, which I love.
Welcome to This is Digital, a podcast brought to you by West Monroe. Join us as we talk to leading experts about bringing the digital mindset to your organization.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of This is Digital, a podcast where we break down the latest digital trends and share tips on how you and your company can be digital. I'm Eric Brown, Senior Partner at West Monroe, also referred to sometimes as Brownie, and I'm excited to be hosting today's episode, another edition of Brownie Bites, a sub-brand that I keep using that marketing never clombs onto. Maybe it'll catch on this time. In today's episode, we're diving into our recent Tech Trends report, Tech Trends to Watch 2024. We'll touch on 5 distinct yet very interconnected technology trends that are driving businesses. And for each, we're going to go through what we're seeing with that trend, why it matters, and what you as an organization can do about it. So please stay tuned through all 5 trends. We're looking forward to the discussion. I'm really excited to have 2 fellow West Monroe colleagues here on the pod with me. We have Casey Foss and Jonathan Williams. Casey is West Monroe's Chief Commercial Officer and is no stranger to This is Digital. She's also passionate about building the consulting firm of the future, bringing together multidisciplinary teams with leading edge technology, design thinking, and assets to design offerings that'll help clients become digital leaders. With Casey, I have Jonathan Williams, who serves as our Managing Director for Technology Experience. He's never heard of This is Digital. He doesn't know what a podcast is. No. He was invited to this meeting for recording something. He has no clue what it is. So I think that was part of the kind of setup. We think it'll add to the intrigue and entertainment factor.
He also doesn't know what the 5 trends are.
No, none of those things.
He does, however, partner with companies to solve mission-critical challenges at the intersection of digital innovation and process transformation.
That's me.
All right, Jonathan, Casey, let's get going. So we'll kick off with just an overview of this report. Can you just give a quick couple-minute overview of the Tech Trends 2024 report?
What we did this time is we identified 5 big issues that we're seeing across our clients and across the entire consulting and technology landscape. Over the last 20 plus months, actually, it's been rapid integration of AI, and you've seen the adoption vary from organization to organization. But one of the big things we're noticing is there's a major push around productivity and how we can begin to use the tool to get and produce and create more. I think we're going to talk about that and what the productivity means to us and what it looks like from a positive productivity standpoint versus some anti-patterns there. We're going to get into cloud infrastructure. Cloud's been something that has been really, really resonant recently. It's been something that has essentially reemerged as a major differentiator and investment for organizations. So we'll talk a lot about what that means. We'll get into some of the synthetic data. I'm really excited to hear about some of the synthetic data and how we're able to take advantage of these tools we have and create and complete data sets that are typically difficult to have, but more importantly, that we're able to be a bit more protective of information that we're getting from customers, patients, employees. We transition and we get a bit into what I call a bit more of the people side of it. And there's the dichotomy between techno optimist and then tech backlash. And there's a whole bunch we can talk about. It's been really interesting watching these conversations take place as organizations are incorporating more tech, but also they're trying to prepare their people for it. And then finally, we kind of use that and transition into some of the ideas of the humanity and in this digital age? Like, how are we being considerate of people? How are we able to really understand their role in what we're advancing from a technology standpoint, and how are we able to help people be continually supportive? So that's a taste of what's covered in the article. There's a lot more. I'm pretty excited that we're going to have a chance to talk about it.
Awesome. Casey, anything to add?
The only thing I'd add is what I found so interesting when I saw the report is that AI is everywhere and nowhere, right? It's very infrequent today that you open a tech trends report that doesn't call out AI or Gen AI. And this tech trends report really embeds it in everything that we do. And it focuses on how it can be deployed in industries, right? Every insurer is struggling with claims processing. How might AI and some of the trends that you highlighted, Jonathan, help us get better at it? Yeah. And the thing that you hit on at the end that I love is this tech trends report is really about how the human is at the center of technology. Nothing is tech for tech's sake or Gen AI because it's the new emerging tech or the next shiny object. It is how can humans do more, create more, enjoy more through tech, which I love as the least technical person on the call.
Well, Casey, for what it's worth, I had one comment to add, and it was exactly what you just said. Like, okay, how do you create a report with 5 trends about AI without having AI in the names, right? So that's really, exactly. I think if that is an assumption that AI is going to be an Uber trend that kind of underscores a lot of what we're doing in terms of emerging tech over the next few years, then what do we do about it? How do we react to that? How do we prepare for it? And how do we keep the humanity in center of it all? So I think that's what drove a lot of these trends. And we'll dig into it with the first one, which is the new productivity paradigm. And I was pleased to see that I don't think any consulting report legally can exist without talking about a paradigm shift of some sort. So glad we're compliant there. Casey, let's start this first trend with you. Can you give us a bit of an overview of this trend in particular, and we'll dig in?
Of course, Eric. So while AI's integration into the workforce is not novel, its applications are now far more sophisticated, significantly augmenting human capabilities, right? And so as we think about the productivity paradigm, it's about how do we get greater quality and innovative outcomes and over just efficiency, right? It's not about doing more, it's about doing better. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest shifts we've seen. If you think back to the 1990s, right? Computers did this to the workforce then. And now we're rethinking what we mean by productivity. And I think that what's really starting to come to life is it's not just about reducing costs or more revenue. It's about how do we take those workforce reductions or restructurings and then leverage technology on top of them to streamline processes and create improvements. And that's really at the core of what we mean by the productivity paradigm shift.
Which is why, incidentally, and Casey, I just want you to confirm this as a chief level executive, we're moving to a 2-day work week at West Monroe, right? So
yes.
Starting next week?
Starting next week, because we can do so much more with our technology. Our technology just does the consulting for us.
All joking aside, though, it's funny. There's always fear when a new technology comes out and everyone is trying to figure out how is this going to impact me. And this is another one of those where ideally it just makes our lives easier, right? So how do we acknowledge that? How do we track metrics around it? This isn't like, oh no, you should be doing 100 more things in 8 hours a day with your job because AI will allow it. It's no, let's figure out how we make you more effective and allow you to use your human brain on things that the human brain should be focused on rather than the trivial day-to-day tasks that can be automated, that can be supported. So,
and oh, by the way, those tasks are things that you'll enjoy more also as a human being. It's not just that there are things that you should be spending your time on, but you'll get greater fulfillment on working on those things.
And we're seeing that it in our clients, right? And in the way we're talking to clients about tracking metrics differently. Jonathan, I don't know if you have anything to add on that and kind of what we're seeing and how that translates into the actions we can take eventually.
Yeah, there's been a lot of great movement over the years in trying to, one, get better about like how are our teams performing, and then try to kind of come to some consensus around how that's being done. Like, so from DORA metrics to a space framework. More recently, West Monroe, we offered some R&D efficiency metrics that take into consideration DORA, space, but also some of our expertise around cost and value creation that are pretty powerful here. And you combine this understanding, you can almost look at it as a health check or a helping to identify where may we need some additional help. One of the things too that over the years that, I've always seen my role when it's come to working with my customers or working with my teams is how do I remove blockers? How do I free up my people so that they are in position to do their best work? And that's one of the big things I've thought about as it relates to productivity. What are we doing and what tools are we providing so that people are in position to do their best work? And some of the metrics that you called out, Eric, actually help us identify this is where our teams are having a hard time. This is how we're let's say, getting feedback from our customers in a way that isn't advancing what they need. Let's identify it, let's track it, and then let's put in place impactful solutions. And this is one of those areas. Like, we're able to just do so much more for our teams, for our customers, through using AI and taking advantage of those productivity gains.
Well, and I think it's fun. It's like going a step beyond, what are some of the blockers of your day, but challenging, industries and clients to think a little bit differently around, well, not only what are the challenges of the day, but what are you focusing on during the day that AI could help with in terms of driving more efficiency. So, for example, like in the pharmaceutical industry or healthcare industry, we've talked to companies that are running labs that are full of standard operating procedures for, various steps and workflows. A lot of that stuff is in documents and has to be referenced, as you're going through those steps. Well, what if an AI could just know, like, all 20 documents with all the standard operating procedures, and if you're unfamiliar with an aspect of that, just ask it, right? It's just so much easier to deal with than sifting through a bunch of documentation.
Yeah.
There's also a little bit, Eric, in what you were talking about in this mindset shift of thinking about AI as a human, right? Even I think in the Tech Trends report, we compare AI to interns, right? How do you give it some of those tasks, reading through regulations, understanding documentation so that they can recall things and you can focus on those higher value actions. And I think as you start to reframe and make sure that technology is driving value for the human stakeholders, it will inspire employees to be part of the journey.
Yeah. And and this is that segue into how do you take that action? How do you help people execute this trend? And that's a big part of it, right? Considering the human element, driving the right training, making sure they're not getting sucked into the fear of this technology impact them, but the vision for how their jobs day to day can be easier and more fulfilling. You all know I always kind of go to the tech side of things, running engineering teams. The thing we're finding working with engineering teams too is it's not about you should be producing more lines of code every day, right? First of all, that's not the measure of progress. But what is looking at things like how many features, meaningful value driving features are we getting into a product every couple of weeks, right? And what is our rate of the rate of defects we're seeing?
Sure.
Right. If developers can lower the rate of defects and actually push out more meaningful features, maybe with fewer lines of code because AI helps them become more efficient, well, the job's easier to deal with, right? So I think looking at those metrics and setting the expectation for how this helps rather than hurts and how the metrics support that are super important as companies are looking to implement.
I love the outcome-based approach you took there, right? Like fewer bugs makes their job easier, makes them more fulfilled, more engaged, and more effective.
Absolutely.
Well, I think a lot of organizations too, and I'll put a bow on this piece of it, operating blind, not having that information has made them it's made it incredibly difficult for them to be able to put in place some of those tools. So starting with understanding where we stand, what are the metrics that conform to defects through production, or how we're doing recovery, or how much coverage we have, they're important. And just like you, Eric, I do tend to lean heavy on the tech side. So I think having that clear framework or a clear guidance on how we're performing gives quite a bit of information on the best ways that you can allow your teams to be even more productive.
Absolutely. Well, with that, that's all the time we have for today because we spent it all on trend one. I was asked to be the pacemaker for this show, which it's not my comfort zone, but I'm doing my best to step out of it and drive some pace. So
we appreciate you.
Let's get into it. Yeah, thanks. Casey knows all too well. Here. Once I start talking, sometimes I just keep going.
Just pull you off.
Wave your hands at me or, do something to let me know if I'm not doing my job as pacemaker.
When you see Jonathan and I falling asleep on one of your monologues, you'll know it's too long.
Yeah. Okay. So not only do I tend to talk a lot, but I'm also boring. Thank you, Casey. I've got a lot to work on, a lot to improve as a human. I'll keep on working on it. Trend 2. Let's get into it. Cloud and infrastructure resurgence. I didn't know it had kind of moved into the background. But hey, let's talk about how it's coming back and coming back strong. Jonathan, you want to give us an overview?
Yeah. When you think about it, so it's interesting. You think about the elements that have dominated cloud, over the years. Like people have moved to the cloud for cost reduction. They wanted to move away from on-prem, or they wanted the ability to scale. They were creating more and more SaaS products. They were wanting to lower the cost of long-term maintenance. These are all things that were some of the guiding principles that drove us to the cloud. And what we found were you found some organizations that took great advantage of what the cloud could be, but you also found a lot of folk who used it as a chance to just do a lift and shift. Let's just take what we were doing and let's put it in the cloud. I think what we're seeing now, though, is an additional focus on we need greater computational ability. We need greater access. We need larger data sets, and we need greater interconnectedness of our information. I think these ideas of the cloud are entirely tied around how are we supporting our machine learnings? How are we supporting our internal AI initiatives? How are we creating better products for our customers? And I think that is what's really changing organizations' use of cloud right now. And they're beginning to optimize it a lot more. I'm finding organizations that most of their major infrastructure is cloud-based. I'm just had this conversation last week, but the challenge was they were still moving away from a lift and shift with a few areas that were optimized for what they needed. They didn't have a huge picture on what the future was going to bring. So I think what we're finding is organizations need something that's going to be able to scale with them, that they need this great computational ability, as well as quite a bit of data that needs to be able to be accessed and readily made available for their larger tools and needs across the organization.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think you have to look at the business as well to look at the various kind of cloud transitions that you're seeing, right? A lot of really large businesses that had the scale went to the cloud and then realized, well, wait a minute, now we're spending more in the cloud, right? Yeah. If you're a massive startup or you're a massive bank right now, that maybe they're spending more on the cloud than they used to on running infrastructure. So it becomes this decision of now, do we go back and control our own infrastructure where a smaller to middle market business, it just doesn't make sense for them to kind of hold that skill set to run a data center and actually,
Sure.
lease data center and associated hardware. So they're all natively in the cloud. So there's different needs for different businesses. And now you allude to the computing power. That's all driven by training large AI models. And there's a lot of the businesses that are creating these models that are going to need their own NVIDIA H100s and other like GPUs that are training and running these models. But someone might want to fine tune one of those models or run one of those to see the efficacy in a particular use case. They're not going to go buy a bunch of specialized GPUs to run them. And you're seeing these cloud providers give those offerings access to that GPU and kind of AI computing capability that essentially gives better access to organizations to this new technology. So it's interesting. There's some movement to drive large scale businesses away from the cloud, but they're also the ones that are offering this capability out to smaller and medium-sized businesses that are able to use this modern technology. So I don't know, Casey, if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
I think what you hit on at the end there, and tying it back to AI, is AI has created two things. It's brought the business much more into these decisions, right? Whereas before, in the background, the technology department or teams or CIOs were asking for budget, and it was whatever was fastest. At one point, it was whatever was cheapest another day, right? And now these conversations are intermingled to be both technical and business oriented. And so they're making different decisions that are much more integrated. And I think that willingness and desire for flexibility comes from the technology environment we're living in today. And so I think that those two shifts are really driving this physical and digital world to be commingled.
Yeah, the big thing for me as companies look at how they react to this plan is very related to what you were saying, Casey, too. Is how do they right size and fit the infrastructure need and the AI model, frankly, which is going to drive an infrastructure need, to what they're trying to do with it. Right now, there's still organizations that are discovering, right? And it's almost this kind of this brute force approach to training AI models. Just get these massive hyper-powered GPUs and hardware together to train these huge LLMs that can do a number of things, and then we'll use the biggest, most overpowered instance of these LLMs to just ask a basic question about math. That doesn't make sense, right? Let's size the model to what we're trying to do. And I think the next thing we got to really consider is the environmental impact, right? So it takes a lot of power to train these huge models. I think we're going to see optimizations in hardware. The one everyone can understand is like hardware that sits on a phone that is effective at applying AI models to generate imagery, right? Or alter and fix images that you're taking on your device, right? Imagine if you could have that type of specialized hardware and a specialized model deployed on a manufacturing floor that can identify patterns that are going to require proactive maintenance, for example, or identify productivity issues as they occur. Well, if these are optimized for the use case, you're not going to ask a device on the floor a question about math, but it can certainly identify that manufacturing issue, and it can be tuned to do so, right? And that will adjust the environmental impact over time. I think we're going to see a lot of that. Businesses aligning to the need and hardware aligned to the computing power associated with that need.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that's been interesting, and I think it kind of aligns really well with this part of the conversation, is like I've been an electric car owner for some time now. I'm on my second car, and watching the jump in the efficiency of just something as simple as the electric motor. So the battery is more efficient. The electric motor is more efficient. And so even a smaller battery pack goes significantly further than my previous car. It just goes much further. I think what this also allows for, and you brought up the environmental concern, is it allows for organizations to have some agency in what their environmental footprint is going to be. They're not, traditionally we're waiting on the big companies to like tell us what they're doing, and we can shame them, and some of the shame may be necessary, but we're able to help organizations, what you're calling out, is they're able to get more efficient and create better models. The more they're able to go further down this path, then that cost, that environmental cost, begins to drop exponentially.
But the one thing, just since you both went environmental, I think the other thing is we also serve clients in industries that are hyper-focused on this, right? Like from an energy and utilities perspective. And I think that some of the environmental trends are also driving the fact that they're realizing their existing infrastructure is at the end of its life, right? It cannot support them on a go forward. So they're having to think about how you rebuild it and how you do things differently, so that we can create a future-ready infrastructure that allows for future-ready technology teams to be designed around it. And then it allows you to deploy digital platforms on top of it that can even augment strategies around how you supply energy or where you get energy from. And so I think that it's a combination of the industry issues or needs are changing too, which require different infrastructure.
Yep, indeed. It will be interesting to see that one play out. And since I'm so good at managing our time and moving us through the trends, I'm going to move on to the next one. Trend 3, synthetic data's very real potential. This one sounds interesting. Casey, you want to give an overview?
Yes. So anybody who knows me knows that I am very passionate about our clients' needs to access and use data differently, but also how we invest in our ability to serve clients using data. And so over the past few years, data has become key to how organizations differentiate. The drumbeat on data monetization, data as an asset, continues to get louder and louder. But for some industries, there's an inability, right, to access, maintain, and secure the right data to make some of those decisions quickly, effectively, safely, especially in those industries that are highly regulated. So synthetic data, just to put a fine point on it, is data that is not a result of manual collection, measurement, or observation, but instead it's manufactured to fill that gap. But Eric, before I let you jump in with the next question, I'm going to flip the table on you a little bit, because you have partnered with many clients in this space. You've spoken at conferences on it. Why don't you take the lead on this one, and Jonathan and I can ask you a few questions.
No, I am the host of this episode. That is not the way this works.
I like to keep you on your toes.
No, I'm happy to. This is one I've talked about before. I've alluded to it in other podcasts. So happy to chat about it. To me, one thing I know I've mentioned in some of the AI podcasts episodes is that a lot of our AI projects, right, in West Monroe, even before LLMs, has been training and implementing machine learning models. The first problem and most of the challenge is actually collecting the data to drive effective output for those models, right? So a lot of our AI projects start with data, building a better data pipeline, making sure that we have data that is of high quality, and that we have the volume of data we need to train a model, for example, in some cases, right? Those are the first two questions, and we often have to respond to those before anything else. But I think I just answered a question without you asking one. But what other specific? I'll let you and Jonathan ask any pointed questions you have about this one.
I'm curious too, Eric. This goes back to me reading about is data oil or is it uranium? And when I thought about this, I thought about one way or the other, data is going to power your organization. So I know it's really, really generic. But as it relates to synthetic data, I thought I'd love to hear your take on how synthetic data allows us to navigate different regulations, different rules that are in place. I'd love to get some of your perspective on that.
Yeah. So, and this isn't always related to AI. I think the most common scenario is in quality assurance and testing systems. In healthcare, highly regulated, well, frankly, any regulated industry, but we talk to a lot of our clients in healthcare, payers and providers about this, right? They have a lot of large systems that have been in place for a number of years. There's always an ongoing or a set of ongoing efforts to modernize these systems. And as you're making changes to them, you have to have confidence that as you make a change, they still work as intended, right? So that is usually what QA helps execute. Now, the easiest thing to do is to just take data from the production environment and copy it, move it down to a development environment. Well, what if that data includes a bunch of healthcare data and personal health information? Well, now we have a problem, right? Because you're moving it down to a non-production environment. There should be governance around that environment, of course, but then it's more loosely available to developers building various aspects of a system. So having that data exposed in a lower environment is a risk that needs to be managed. So what if we could just have a synthetic data doesn't mean all the data was created from scratch. What if we moved that structure of data and had tools that allow us to pull all that personal identifying information out of it? Well, you can still test most cases with that scenarios or derivations of those scenarios, right? So that's one example of synthetically modified data, which I put in that synthetic data category, to reduce risk. Then we can also use synthetic data to train AI models. And there's a couple benefits to that. When you're training an AI model, you're looking for quantity of data. You need large volumes to train a model in many cases. And then you're looking for quality. Well, we can measure quality in a couple different ways. Do we understand the structure? We can train models on unstructured data too. But is it quality data? Do we know what's contained in it? Now, that can all be fine, but then there's always, does the data represent statistically the things we need it to produce unbiased models? Well, we know all the stories, right? Where we might have well-structured, vast amounts of data, but they're heavily biased. So what do we get? We get heavily biased models. We get racist models. So we can synthesize data to try to once we understand that bias, pull that bias out of these sets and train models that ideally reduce significantly that bias and allow us to continually improve them over time. So there's a lot of ways we can use synthetic data to drive value.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
How do I make sure, because you just started to go into the edges of the gotchas with synthetic data. How do I make it easy for me? How do I get started with making sure that I have the right synthetic data, the right amount, and I'm getting it, and it's not building a bias model? Where do I start?
It's all on testing the output, right? So LLMs are a great example. I can give you a simple summary, right? There's a lot of complex tools that make it so, right? But there are a number of somewhat quote unquote standardized tests that can ask a series of questions in various categories of a large language model, for example, and assess, because it's not a yes or no, right? It can assess in a kind of conceptual or somewhat objective way whether the answer was correct and whether it exemplifies some sort of bias, right? So there are a lot of complex tools that can assess consistent inputs and relevant outputs. Now, the outputs of AI models, especially generative models, are non-deterministic, right? They may give the right answer a number of different ways. So, right, we have ways to measure how close those answers are and whether they include some bias in their answers. Those tests are going to grow and evolve over time. Every organization will need to figure out how they can test maybe a more specific model in a similar way. And there's tools to help do that. but that ultimately is going to be the way to identify bias and then evolve models that hopefully eliminate that bias and test it again using the same test. Now, guess what? You're going to miss something. You're going to realize, well, we've deployed a model. It's great. It addresses some of this bias. And over time, you're going to realize, oops, there's another scenario that came up that introduces some other bias, or it's just flat out inventing something that's false. You're going to have to build that into your guardrails and test against that over time, right? So just like any software, right, you're going to have a series of checks and balances and producing software and making sure that it's producing output that is acceptable. It's just going to be a little bit more complex and not as kind of concrete, right? You're going to have these kind of open-ended, non-deterministic outputs you're going to have to address.
Can I ask you, where are the limits of the limits from a use case standpoint of synthetic data? Like thinking about where what are some of the examples of where real or actual data is needed, relevant, and let's look at synthetic data. Let's put it to the side for a moment.
I can dream up in most scenarios, at least supplementing data with synthetic elements would be potentially helpful. Even if I think about, if I want to now, within reason. So here's one example, right? Let's say I had 1 million images of the human brain, and 50% of those had various forms of cancer evident, and then 50% of them were clean. Ostensibly, I could build a model that can identify when a tumor of some sort exists, and maybe the images where it exists are a specific type of cancer, right? And it can identify when they don't exist. Well, would I want to synthesize imaginary pictures of the brain that kind of are based on, okay, now we're talking about medical scenarios, and that gets really, really dangerous, right? So that's one example where you want to, when you're training a model that is going to be identifying a healthcare scenario, or an image that shows a particular feature of the brain in a certain scenario, sure, you're going to want to be really careful about creating synthetic data from scratch. But that could be supplemented by synthesized data to support the various images in some way, right? So that's maybe one example of where we have to be careful. And the human is always going to be participating in these things, right?
Sure.
I would say that there's more limits on the application of a model than the ways we can get creative with synthetic data to train it or to use in a particular situation. These models are not going to be automating physicians' jobs, right? In these healthcare examples, for example. They're going to be supporting physicians to be more efficient, ideally, in the future.
So you're saying we're a ways away from just having not a hot dog as the output of one of these things, borrowing from the Silicon Valley where they created the whole not a hot dog app.
Oh my God. That's a reference.
I know. Come on, man. Deep
for those of you who haven't watched Silicon Valley, it's worth a watch, in my opinion.
So, Eric, we've hijacked your show long enough.
Yeah.
We've blown your timeline out of the water. So we'll let you bring us back to the next topic.
I'm sure there'll be some creative editing that goes on with Trend 3. See, this is the danger. You wanted to turn over the question.
I know,
to me,
I did, and I roped it back in. I roped it back in. I tried to play your role. I'm not as good at it. Lesson learned.
If we're going to move on in edit, I do want to say I did come into this understanding that Brownie Bites were actually a technology cooking show combination, and I have brownie ingredients here, so I thought that's what we were going to be doing. But
Bites, BYTES.
See, I got the BITES. Someone,
Sorry to disappoint.
There we go.
All right, where are we? Who am I? Trend 4. Let's talk about techno optimism versus the tech lash. tech backlash. Gotta admit, before this episode, I never heard that word. Not sure how I feel about it. Seems like a snappy word that we're inventing, and maybe it works. Let's talk about it. Yeah. Jonathan, what is techno-optimism versus the techlash?
Yeah, I almost liked it too, better than the idea of tech pessimist. And I think what we're finding here is, I think about over the last several years, going to meetings. Casey, you're also in the ECC, so the Economic Club, going to dinners and talking to a variety of people who were exceptionally excited around what the potential could be, and what the potential of AI could be, what the potential of quantum can be, all these great things that they were excited about. And then also talking to people at some of the various organizations that I do volunteer work with, and this large fear of, is my job going to get taken away? Am I going to be able to actually continue to access things that I couldn't access before? And I think a lot of what we're dealing with in this trend is the idea that we're navigating the immense possibility and the positive feelings people have around those possibilities with the downside and the dread and some history of people being digitally left behind. I mean, we had the term digital divide for a reason. And so it's really required us to in my opinion, to take some consideration around how are we being from a governance standpoint? Like, are we being transparent with what we're using? Are we being transparent with how we're inputting information, or how we're using information? Are we creating tools that are accessible to a lot of different people, and not requiring them to have this huge understanding of the underpins of these models?
Yeah, Casey, what about and I think there's so much, we know there's a lot of interconnectivity across all these trends, but like this one and the next one, humanity's role in this new digital age, and techno-optimism versus techlash. I mean, organizations have to be clear on their stance with these new technologies and give training across the board to make sure that people understand their stance and how that impacts their vision for the evolution of jobs within the organization, the evolution of the organization itself. Casey, that's stuff that you focus on a lot. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. And I think I actually kind of laughed at the title of this section, because I think you need both. You need techno-optimists in an organization, and you need those tech skeptics, if you will.
Yep.
And not pessimists, but people who are going to challenge the technology to a meaningful point, right? To make sure that some of the roadblocks that we've talked about on this podcast don't come to life, right? We don't create synthetic data that is biased. We don't deploy AI on a process that requires human intervention and kind of let it just run, right? So I think both organizations need both. But then to your point, it's then how do you ingrain, once you've picked a tool, once you've had that internal debate among leaders of what's the right tool, what's the right approach, what's the right governance, then it's making sure that there is transparency across the organization, and you set up the right trainings. And so as you think about how you, and not everybody needs to be trained the same, right? Like the AI prompt engineering training that I'm going to take is wildly different than an engineer that sits on your team, right, Eric? And so like you need to customize the training for the job to be done.
Absolutely. And I think, to me, I'm going to blend this into Trend 5, because I just think it's so related, right? And as a technologist, and I mean, Casey, you've known me for a long time, especially, you know, I'm a techno-optimist for sure, and I need people to balance me, and, you know, with the pragmatism and that kind of realistic look at things. But we, even as a technologist, like I this is something I focus on over and over again, having humanity in the decisions that we make around how we apply technology, how we build it into our processes, is so critical. So let's maybe parlay the previous discussion into the closing trend. And Casey, do you want to intro that one?
Well, I was going to say, and before I intro the trend, Eric, I am the complete opposite side of your coin, right? I was at TED 2 years ago, and they asked for a show of hands when we were discussing AI and who's building a bunker under their house. And I was like, Sanya, like I am that person. And so I think that as you think about humanity's role in the digital age, we need humans to show creativity, judgment, and empathy. Those three things are really what will help us shape how we use technology to enhance our own capabilities. But without having that ability to have judgment or a lens that you put things through, the value simply won't be there. And so for me, and this goes back to something I said at the very beginning of this call, to take on value, a creative, and innovative work as a human being, I need technology in order to be able to think differently, do faster, do better, right? And so to me, it is really this almost infinity symbol where they feed into each other and kind of coexist forever.
Yeah. In Jonathan, I know you have a comment here too, but at a Chicago innovation event recently, I said something like this before, and I still believe it. And this is, again, the optimist in me. I think this technology and the advancement of AI specifically can usher in a period of creativity in humanity that we've never seen before. But that assumes that we're worthy of it. we give it the respect it deserves and understand the dangers that can occur if we don't give it that respect. And we let it supplement what we're doing every day, right? In creative ways. So we're gonna have roadblocks and hurdles, but I'm extremely optimistic around where it can take us. So Jonathan, go ahead.
I couldn't agree with you more. I thought about this recently. So, for a long time in our space, I've been part of organizations where we've required some of our engineers to do technical coding challenges. And it's a meaningful part. Like, you can give them a project. I've had situations where, we paid someone to do a coding challenge, and that meant they were further along in the process. So not everyone gets paid to do a coding challenge, but some people were paid. The more and more feedback I'm getting from people now, though, and I just saw a post about this today, was that they feel that these, the first thing that they're being asked to do is a coding challenge, not from a person, but from an email response. Or the first thing that they're being told to do is to interact with AI as they've applied for jobs. And there's a deep frustration, not in the challenge itself or even interacting with AI, but the feeling that they're being forced to talk to a robot and not be treated as a person. And it's that so the actual tools that these organizations are using, great. They hit on a lot of the things that we want, but what they're missing is consideration for how they're deploying them and how people are. So to the larger point we've been making, taking advantage of great productivity tools, enabling organizations to accomplish so much more, and then not losing sight on, with the excitement to deploy these things, the impact on people and how they're perceiving your organizations. So in that last example, the engineer that I know essentially has created this manifesto that, I won't apply for these jobs. I won't respond when they're asking for these things. If I'm not walked through this process of what it looks like up front, then I'm just going to opt out. And I think organizations are going to have to adapt, because they're going to miss out on great talent. And they're going to really, really turn off people who could have been interested in these organizations, but not want to put up with walls that are being erected, as opposed to using them in a way that is still human and still have people feel like their skill sets matter.
I love that example. I think I think we see a lot of, just to give you some practical application from some of our clients, Eric, I think we see a lot of hospitals starting to do this, leaning into technology through apps where they can engage with, call it a cancer patient, in the way that they would when they're in the hospital, right? It's an extension of their experience, not an augmentation. And I think that as long as we think about these new technologies as supplementary and complementary, then they can make it better, right? I don't have to constantly go to a website or get somebody on the phone. I can interact with you on my terms, on something that's extremely personal and ongoing. And I can do it in a way that makes it easiest for me. And that's, I think, how we have to think about all of these tools. When we say human-centered, it's how do you design the process that has all components working in my favor?
Absolutely. This has been an awesome conversation. All good things must come to an end, and I think we got to wrap. So, what would be great is for each of us to maybe just go through a final thought related to these trends that we've gone through, and then we can close things out holistically. So, I will volunteer to start, and I think these topics are huge. They're daunting to think about. But the great thing is giving the evolution of the computing power that we have, the ability to synthetically create data, we can move forward in baby steps. We can try and fail quickly, whether it's applying AI in the context of automating a piece of workflow or supporting a job. So be open-minded and bite off small chunks. And as you're doing that, make sure that you're building the foundation that you can continually build upon, right? You don't have to build an entire data pipeline to support one incremental AI model, but think about how you build a scalable data pipeline to serve multiple models in the future, because it's going to be something that becomes more and more important as we experiment with incorporating new cloud infrastructure, computing power, and AI models to support creativity with a human element embedded. So that is my thought. Jonathan, I'm going to pass it to you next.
Yeah,
for closing comment.
I'll take it. The only thing that I'll add here is, I'm a techno optimist as well, Eric, and I think about what potentially, through these trends, what we're capable of in creating just a better work experience, better products, solving really massive challenges that exist for people. I would hope that we approach it with a clear understanding of the past journey that we've been on, and put in place meaningful tools that allow for it to be, for the goodness that technology is bringing to be shared by everyone.
Absolutely. Now, Casey, bring the two tech optimists back down to reality and tell us, what are we not considering?
Well, so Eric, you definitely stole mine. I was going to say be precise. So pick a small piece of the pie. Don't try and solve the whole pie, but I'll pick a new one since you stole my thunder, and play the part I'm supposed to, which is I would also say bring together business and technology people and teams as you're imagining what the technology can do for you. So it's about all stakeholders. Talk to clients, talk to employees, talk to business leaders, talk to technology leaders to make sure that you're designing the technology to provide the most value to the business.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It was great chatting with you. So great that we went a little over our time, but 8 minutes or so. I think we're doing all right.
I think we started late. We started late.
We did, right? Well, you started in your underground bunker and the lighting was bad, so then you had to move to your office, right? So,
right.
I think we're okay. Really appreciate the time, and Feel free to check out the report, West Monroe's Tech Trends 2024 report. You can go through all 5 of those trends in much more gory detail. And thank you all for listening.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to This is Digital. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow or subscribe on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget to leave us a review. For more information on This is Digital, visit westmonroe.com/thisisdigital.